right, part 2 of my video talking about whether or not I think the most recent balance patch changes had good buffs, good nerfs, bad buffs, or bad nerfs. And this section will cover the changes to the Kandarian demon. And this should be a fun one because I am certain that not a single person will disagree with anything I have to say about demons on this video and the changes that they received. I actually think that this video will really surprise you in terms of like how in favor of a lot of these changes I am. Particularly like in the general section, but I don't know. It seems like if I ever say anything about demons and whether or not they're like buffs are not justified, then I get people coming for my neck and they're just like, hey, you know, you don't have as many hours in demon as I do, so why don't you shut up? I only get a handful of those comments. Hey, most of you who disagree with me are extremely respectful, and I really appreciate that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with disagreeing with me as long as you're respectful the whole way. So I appreciate that. And if you ever do disagree with me and you want to share why you disagree with me in a respectful way, no problem with that. Please do comment. I love having these discussions. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, general changes. Infernal energy regeneration changed from 15 points per second to 20 points per second during the Necronomicon phase. That is a buff, and I think that that is a good buff. That's really just going to make demons more lethal. That's going to make demons deadlier once they reach the Necronomicon phase. I think that's a positive. I think the Necronomicon phase should feel really intense, and it should be difficult to survive in that phase if you're a survivor team. That's kind of the point where most of your resources should be exhausted if the demon has been doing their job, and now they're throwing absolutely everything at you. So I think it's a good buff. I could even see this being buffed even further, but we'll have to wait and see. Right now, I think that it's a very, very good buff. Skeleton Elite Arms health was changed from 100 to 200. I never really personally noticed any issue with Skeleton Arms health like being too low and Skeleton Elite Arms falling off a lot when I was attacking them. But having said that, I don't see any reason why this isn't a good buff. Elites in general, I think, need to be buffed and need to be stronger. So anything that makes it so elites don't just get delimbed instantly is a good thing. So I think overall that buff is a positive change. Possession level 5, extra health of possessed units from 40%, change from 40% to 10 to 50%, 10% increase. This is probably the thing that I got criticized about the most. Now, I don't know if I misspoke on that video and said that like this change was the thing that was a big buff to basic unit possessions. If I did, listen, I do all this stuff in one take, folks. So sometimes I misspeak. Yes, this is like more of a late game change for possessing units. This doesn't really have any effect whatsoever on possessing basics in the early game. So this is something that's for way later in the match. And in that regard, it's a good buff. At that point, if they reach possession level 5, giving them extra health, and if that's what they invested in was possessions, making it so that they're even tankier, I think is a positive change. I have no issue with buffing possessions when it comes to super late game. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think it should be done because, as I said in my Survivor video, in regards to a lot of late game units, anything that makes it harder for those late game units to get one, or you're pretty much never going to one shot anything. I've never seen it been done, but 2 to 3 shots and you're just dead within like a few seconds. Anything that makes it harder for survivors to do that to the demon, I think is a good thing. So I think this is a good buff. Possessed survivor headshot bonus multiplier to other survivors changed from 1.7 to 1.2. One of the few nerfs here, actually, makes it harder for possessed demons to down other survivors because now headshots won't deal as much damage. It's kind of interesting because I'd be interested to know, like, I don't know off the top of my head what the multiplier is for like basic units. I guess if we scroll all the way up here, we could see that the headshot multiplier, at least to bosses, is now 1.25, and they're making it so that the headshot multiplier to your fellow survivors, if you are currently possessing one as the demon player, is even less. So it looks like it was probably a little too out of tune at 1.7. 1.7 is pretty extreme, especially when you consider how much damage hunters actually do. But I think the nerf to 1.2 is probably too significant. Like I think 1.5 would be like a good middle ground. 1.5, 1.4, somewhere in there, I think would have been fine. Do I think that it needed to be nerfed? Yeah. Do I think they probably over nerfed it? Yes. So I'm going to say it's a bad nerf. I'm going to say that this probably didn't need to be nerfed as much as it was, because the number one way that you're supposed to punish hunters is headshotting people. And maybe, again, we talked about in my previous video about how some of these might be band-aid changes, band-aid fixes until they can get a bigger patch out. This is especially weird to me because you can drop your gun right now as a hunter. So it seems like the main way that you can punish a demon that's trying to possess you right now as a hunter is to drop your gun. So if they're able to do that, then you should keep it at 1.7. You shouldn't nerf it at all, because they have a very clear and obvious and easy way of making it so that a demon player can't do any damage to your team, basically, because you could just drop your gun. So like if they had made it so it's now no longer possible to drop your gun once you've surpassed the fear threshold and you're about to get possessed, then I could maybe understand this nerf. But as it is right now, I probably would have kept it at like a 1.7. Because then it makes it to where, like, if you're a hunter and you get possessed and you didn't drop your gun, you're going to get punished super hard. And that's still, again, only if the demon player is good enough to hit headshots. So not only do you have to make 2 mistakes as a survivor, the demon player also needs to be really good on top of that for you to get punished this hard with 1.7. So I think it's a bad nerf across the board. I don't like it. The possessed elite deadite health was changed from 2,800 to 3,000. The possessed elite skeleton health was changed from 2,000 to 2,250. Possessed berserker health changed from 1,300 to 1,500. I'll just kind of group these all together. These are all buffs. These are all good buffs. Anything that makes like rushing with basic units on the warlord and makes like other strategies more viable, I think is like a good thing. Buffing, this is a start. This probably still isn't enough, by the way. Elites probably need even more buffs than this to make them like a viable strategy in replacement of basic unit possessions. But it's a start. So I'll say it's a good buff, even if it's not enough, because it's a step in the right direction. So I think anything that buffs any of these other units that you don't see used a lot, or a lot of people think is too weak, is a positive thing. And we're on the right track now for offering demon players an alternative to the basic unit possessions. Car possession maintain energy has been changed from 0.5 to 0.3. This is a good buff. It now makes it easier to... I should really just take both of these car possession things and group them together, so I will. And I'll say the car possession energy cost change from 100 to 60. Car possessing before this patch was basically useless because it cost so much energy to possess, and then it was so easy for survivors to knock you out of it that it was almost never a good idea to possess cars. Now possessing cars is actually a viable strategy. And cars, as we know, is a very, very strong mechanic. And so giving demons a means to fight back against it now is a good thing. They need to have the means to fight back against it, especially with the context that windows are as strong as they are right now. So like if they somehow nerfed windows, I'd be kind of ups, and like let's say that we're in some dystopian future where they don't nerf basic unit possession and they have these buffs in here to make it more viable for demons to get rid of cars, and they nerf the ability to nerf windows. So now basic units are a problem and you cannot get away from them under any circumstances. Then I wouldn't like these car possession changes. But under the idea that, hey, if you lose your car because the demon possessed it and drove it off somewhere, you need to retreat to the nearest safe building, or as a survivor player, have enough smarts to always try to be next to some kind of, like, don't just drive off into the middle of the woods. Always make sure you're next to a building that you can safely retreat to, and understand that if the demon's smart, they're going to possess the car and leave you out in the open where you don't have a good place to retreat to. So this is a good change, especially under the assumption that a good survivor player is always going to know where their nearest safe window is and simply retreat to it and use that to stall out the demon until they are forced to leave. So knowing that, this car possession change to make car possessing more viable is fantastic. Increased arms dismemberment resistance for the elite skeletons. It's kind of wild. I guess there's a serious issue with skeleton elites and losing their limbs. That's another buff, and it's a good buff. I guess skeleton elite arms were just dropping off left and right between these two changes to make it harder to delimb them. So that's a good thing. I personally never really noticed it, and I even like have attempted using really high dismemberment stuff against elite skeletons. Like I remember using saw guns with Leader Ash a ton, and I didn't really notice their arms falling off a bunch, but they probably have data that told him, wait a minute, skeleton elite arms are falling off left and right. And skeleton elites in general are just like really bad. So anything that buffs skeleton elites and makes them harder to deal with is a great thing to me. So I like that change. Warlord. Possessed Deadite stun time changes has been changed from 1.5 seconds to 1 second. Elites changed from 1.5 second to 1 second. Bosses changed from 2 seconds to 1.5 seconds. Possessed Deadite balance bar changes changed from 300 to 400. Elites changed from 525 to 625. Boss from 800 to 900. Now, we got to separate these. For elites and bosses, lowering the time that they are stunned for, I think that is a good buff. Because anything that makes elites and bosses more viable, I think is a positive change. Again, as I've said 100 times, anything that makes elites feel like elites and like, oh no, like we got to watch out for these guys. And then, because to me, elites should be like, okay, we need to all be careful here and kind of pay attention to this guy. And bosses should be so strong that it's like all 4 people need to focus this boss or you're going to get wiped. That's how strong bosses should be. Bosses should basically never be dealt with by just 1 or 2 players. So anything that makes it harder to just stun lock them and make it so they can't do anything and kill them before they can even move is a positive thing. And all that's going to apply to the increase in their balance bar as well, and making it harder for them to stun, as well as making it so that they're not stunned for as long. So for both of those, I think it's a good thing. Now, for basics specifically, this is a buff. I think this is a bad buff. Basics here, and I probably went into this a little bit in my video that talked about basic possessing in the early game and how it was bad for the game. Allow me to explain. if I didn't make it clear in that video. The reason I don't like this is that I don't think that this change does anything to bully squads. I don't think that this change is going to make it any harder for like a really organized 4-person team that's on comms and are all high level and are all really good at the game. This isn't going to affect them at all. They're not going to notice any difference. They're still going to stun your basic possessed unit instantly and just lay waste to them. So if you're a demon out there that's like, well, Sledge, you're dumb and don't know what you're talking about because one time in my 100 game win streak, I got the streak ended because I played against a 4-man bully squad who just insta-stunned everything. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. This is not going to affect those people at all. It's still going to be terrible for you. The only thing that this is really going to affect is solo queuers. This is going to have a significant effect against solo queuers, and I've already felt it playing it because I'm a solo queue player myself. And I've even seen from people who like play exclusively in 4-man bully squads. They're like, dude, I don't even care about this. I just spec my Henry the Red out to do full balance bar damage, and me and my buddies all just spec for balance bar damage and take sledgehammers, and we just insta stun everything, and while they're stunned we just kill them before they can even do anything. So that doesn't really affect them, who I think it's organized groups that are the problem. It's not survivors in general. And so this isn't really going to have any effect on them, but it is going to have effect on solo queue. And the problem with that is that the only real viable strategy for the most part in solo queue to deal with basic unit possessing and rushing players was to stick together. That's all you can really do. Like when I play solo queue, I'll pick whatever survivor character we don't have. Like if we don't have a support, I'll pick that. If we don't have a leader, I'll pick that. So on and so forth. And then I'll tend to stick next to my teammates as much as I can. Eventually, if teammates just fart around for too long, I have to run off and try to do the objective, or else we're going to lose on timer. But for the most part, I try to stick with my team. So that makes in solo queue, the other two ways that you can beat basic unit possessing is to get in a car and drive away, or to vault windows over and over. And those two things are not really viable in solo queue, because the only way that works is if everyone on your team is good at it. If I jump into a window over and over and the demon goes, okay, well, this Sledge dude knows what he's doing and I can't catch him, so I got to move on. If he just moves on and then wipes out one of my teammates who doesn't know what they're doing, then it doesn't matter if I know what I'm doing, and that's not a viable strategy, because all 4 people are going to need to know what to do. So that makes it so that essentially what I'm trying to say here is, in solo queue, getting in cars and using windows and everybody separating and forcing the demon to chase people and commit to chases that don't gain them anything is not a viable strategy in solo queue. The only thing that you can do to fight back against possessed basics is to stick together. That's all you can really do in solo queue. And this hurts your ability to do that, because the likelihood that all 4 people are going to just stick together hip to hip is pretty low in solo queue. There's always going to be at least one person who gets a little too far away from the group. And that's going to make it that much harder for solo queuers to deal with basic unit possessions. But like I said, at the same time, it's not going to make it any harder for organized bully squads to still beat up on you. So it's a bad change in so many ways, because it's not going to feel any better for the demon when they face those bully squads. And it's going to feel even worse for survivors who don't play in bully squads. So I think it's a bad change overall for both sides for buffing basic possessed units, and how difficult it is to stun them and how long they're stunned for. I think it's just a bad change all the way around. So I hope that gives you an idea of why I feel that way. It doesn't really affect bully squads, but it significantly hurts solo queuers. That's what I'm trying to get into. And I think it's bully squads that are the problem. It's 4-person hit squads that are the problem. For Puppeteer, possessed Deadite stun time changes the same thing. Basics were changed from 2 seconds to 1.5 seconds. Elites changed from 2.5 to 1.5. Again, balance bar changes 450 to 550. Again, I think that these are good buffs as far as the elites are concerned. Now, I will say this. Possessed basics on the Puppeteer's end, they are so bad. They're such a bad unit. And Puppeteers, for some reason, are the worst at possessing out of the 3 demons. I don't know why that's the case when that's supposed to be their whole gimmick. I don't mind this change, actually, even for basics. Because basics are already so bad, and I think they're already meant to just basically be like little walking bombs. Like, I think that the way the devs intended Puppeteer basics to be played is to spam a bunch of them, they run in, die, and explode, and that's how they deal most of their damage. They overwhelm you by running in, dying, and blowing up on you and dealing a bunch of damage. However, they don't do enough, so it's not great. And truth be told, I think Puppeteer basics need more than this. Like, Puppeteer basics are still not good enough even with this. So I think that these are good buffs across the board to basics and elites. The reason that it's okay on Puppeteer, but it's not okay on Warlord, is mostly because Warlord just has so many tools. First of all, Warlord can spam possessions better than any of the other classes because possessing costs less for them. But also, their basic units are just stupidly strong because of, like, puke canceling and stuff like that. Like puke canceling is the main reason. Puke canceling makes Warlord basics absolutely disgusting. Especially because the puke itself stops you from being able to run or dodge. That's why I don't like it on Warlord basics, but I'm okay with it on Puppeteer basics, because Puppeteer basics suck anyway, and they probably need to be buffed outside of this. Necromancer, elite changes. It's also kind of interesting how the Puppeteer boss did not see any changes. You notice that? That's kind of weird to me, because I think the Puppeteer, he's the best boss of the 3, but he really has a hard time with, like, getting stuck in an animation and then making himself super vulnerable. But I guess the other 2 have that issue even worse because they can't even go invisible to avoid being shot. So I don't know. Maybe they considered that, and how Puppeteer definitely is the strongest of the 3 boss units. But I think just like the other 2 boss units, he has issues with getting just melted too fast. So that's something that probably need to be addressed in a future patch. Necromancer did get a change to bosses in addition to the elites and basics. Bosses went from 700 to 800, 2 seconds to 1.5. Elites as well. And then elites 500 to 550. All those are buffs. Not talking about the changes to basics. Let's just talk about elites and bosses here. I think those are good buffs. As I've said before, on the other ones, bosses and elites need to be buffed. They need to be put at a point where they're a serious threat and can't just get instantly stun locked. Yeah, that's really all there is to it. I can't elaborate any further than I already did with Warlord. Now, the basics are kind of interesting because they don't have the same problems that Warlord has, because Warlord's basics are really out of control. And then you have Puppeteer's basics who are really bad, and Necromancer's kind of somewhere in the middle. But I will say that I think that it is a bad buff. And the reason for that is because of how absurd the flautist can get at times. What this basically means is, like, depending on where you are on the map, you can just have the game ended right then and there, because they could just spawn the flautist in a really bad spot and you won't have anywhere to go, and then they'll bring out the possessed basic and just destroy you. So, like, you think about how powerful a warlord is just on their own. A basic possessed unit from a necromancer, a basic skeleton that's possessed, could be just as strong as a warlord if they have the flautist up. So for that reason, I think it's the same sort of issue that warlord has. Again, I can't elaborate much more than I already did with warlord, where I talked about how these changes in particular really don't affect bully squads, 4-person hit squads at all, but they do really negatively affect like solo queuers. And it's especially bad in solo queue because with the flautist, people tend to not even go shoot the flautist. And one other thing I want to note too is that it really stinks to make any of these kind of changes at the moment because of how often you can put the flautist in a spot where it can't be reached. And when I mention this, by the way, because I talked about this in the scummy or not scummy video, when I talk about places that can't be reached, I mean places where you literally cannot shoot the flautist. I'm not talking about like, oh, he put it on the roof of a building where like the survivor can't get up there, but they can still shoot the flautist. That's not what I'm talking about. As long as you're able to shoot the flautist in some way, it's perfectly fine to place it wherever you're placing it. I'm talking about demons who like stuff their face into the wall of a room that can't be accessed and drop the flautist in there. So then it can't be shot at all for its entire duration. That's what I'm talking about. So it's really brutal if they summon a flautist in one of those spots and now you've got to deal with a possessed basic because it's extremely hard to run away. And here's what I've run into since this newest patch that I've seen from like a really good necro player is I've seen a necro that will like drop their flautist in the early, this all happens in the early game. They'll drop it in a building, maybe even not necessarily a place where you can't reach it, but they'll drop it in a building. You're like, oh boy, I need to get out of here. So you go to get into a car, but they possess the car. And now because possessing the car costs less, they jump in it and drive it away. And now you're kind of caught out in no man's land. And now they spawn a portal and possess a basic. So now you're near a flautist with a really strong basic skeleton. You can't really get to the flautist without getting run down. And you can't really run away from it because you're going to run out into the open where you have nowhere to get away from the basic unit. So it's like a lose-lose situation. And you just get destroyed. And like I said, the only real solution to that is to group up. But now grouping up does even less because the basics got changed and now they don't get stunned as long and it's harder to stun them. So now it's even less viable to all just stick together and stun lock things. So overall, I don't really like those changes on Necro or Warlord, although I'm fine with it on Puppeteer. So I hope that clears things up on anyone who thought I was a jabroni when it came to some of my demon opinions. As you can see, I think most of these buffs are a good thing. I just wanted to make that clear to everybody. Most of these demon buffs are a good thing. And I'm assuming at this point that I think the reason the majority of these buffs came out is because the devs saw, hey, we don't have enough demon players. And I don't know if it's because they changed something with their servers or what, but at least since these changes have happened on the West Coast servers, I'm getting games much faster. It seems like more people are playing demon now. That might not be the case. Maybe they just fixed whatever bug they had with their servers on West Coast. I don't know. Because I never had an issue finding demon players when I would switch to East Coast. But ever since this happened, now I get into games within like 15 seconds every match. So, hey, that's a positive thing. And I think the majority of these changes, the majority of these buffs to demon are a good thing. And yeah, that's what I wanted to clear up because I've seen a lot of people come at me and be like, dude, you say every single demon buff is terrible and every single survivor nerf is terrible. Like, it's pretty much the opposite right now, okay, with this most recent balance change. So I like most of these changes. But as usual, if you made it to this point in the video, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already and let me know in the comments what you think. And as long as you are respectful, I have no problem with you completely disagreeing with everything I have to say. I love having these discussions. and it's all about improving the future of this game, so I'm all for it. But thanks again for watching, everybody. I hope you liked the video, and I will see you next time.